Hello everyone. So I'll just be making a quick, easy tutorial on how to place an anime character into a real life background, and this is going to be for Paint.net. This could be doable in Photoshop, GIMP, other image editing software as well. It's just the controls are going to be different. And so I'll be using Saber for the image, but I have Rin just to showcase how to remove the background. So these are going to be the main steps we're going to be going through. First, we want to crop the picture. Like I said earlier with Saber, she already has no background, so we don't have to do any cropping or anything, so that's really nice. But I'll just showcase how to do that for Rin. And just to make sure I got the source right, the background image is the Leeds Castle Panorama, and it's by Amanda Jim. Um, And so let's get started with this tutorial. So for the first step, in order to remove the background, you can use this magic wand key. It won't be perfect, but click on some part of the background, and then all you want to do is just change the tolerance so that it selects less and less of the image until you get somewhere um, where you don't remove the characters like hair and outline, but you remove parts of the background. And all you have to do is if you hold down Control, you can actually select more and more of the picture. So I'll just be doing that real quick. Okay, so now once you're kind of removed most of the background, um, it's not perfect. You can see a little bit of the background still on the like the edge of the image. But once you remove like a majority of the background, it's usually easier if you have a background that's a completely different color from the character. So like if the character is wearing like red, let's say red for Rin, if in this case the background, the top half was a lot brighter. It was like a whitish grayish color, so it was different, a lot different from the color of her shirt. So it was a lot easier on the top, but on the bottom, the colors were a lot more similar. So the bottom half was a lot more difficult. So usually you want to make sure that you pick a background that's completely different, or at least as different as possible from the character. So once you have kind of like the general outline, you can go around fixing like these small details, like here, manually using an eraser. You can do that, but instead of that, which takes a lot of time, and then doing things like changing the opacity of the eraser. So once you do that, it actually kind of you can blend, you can almost like smooth out the edges like this. But rather than doing that manually, which takes a pretty long time, I'm actually gonna just use the it's a plugin, but I'll use the Anti-Aliasing plugin. It's by DPY, and I'll link the Anti-Aliasing plugin for Paint.net. And so with this, you can actually see already that the lines get really smooth and nice. So zoom in a little bit closer, but you can already see that that most of the like jaggediness of the edge basically it's removed. And gamma, usually I just set it to like this 2.0, the normal, and you can see you can mess around with the sliders to see what gives you the best results. But in this case, the default gives me a really good result. So I'll just go with the default, and then once I render the anti-aliasing, you can see that the lines are way better. The lines smoothen, or the lines are very smooth, and you can barely see almost any artifacts or almost any outline of the background. It's very good. So I'll be linking that plugin in the description below. So these are the first two steps that we went through: cropping the picture, and then using the anti-alias, or you can use the eraser manually. It just takes a lot longer for the edge. So once we do that, we can rotate and fit the image angle so that it fits the actual real life picture. So now that I'm finished with removing the background for Rin, now I'll actually go on to Saber, and this should be the layer just to make sure. Okay, so in this case, the image is pretty much like straight on. It's a panorama image. So it's a little bit, the angle might be a little bit wonky. For the most part though, the angle, she's facing straight on. Her body's kind of facing, her body's tilted a little bit this way, like this way. Kind of draw like an arrow. So it's facing a little bit this way. Uh, so it's tilted a little bit, but it's not, it's almost unrecognizable. So in this case, I probably wouldn't change it, but just to show you how you would be able to change it, you can just go onto layers and you can go to rotate/zoom, and you can see all the shortcuts over here as well. And once you do that, you'd actually just, you can try fitting the character to the perspective of the image. So in this case, I'd say, oh, let me change the layers real quick. That's one thing to make sure of, that you're always on the layer that you want to adjust. So the layer that you want to adjust, in this case, Saber, all you want to do is change the zoom. Usually you don't want to go above 1.24 because you'll lose some details. It'll look a little bit blurry. But you change the zoom, and you also, usually you'd want to just change the rotation of this axis, or the top axis. Oh. In this case, I don't think I need to make many adjustments, because as I said, she's pretty much facing straight on, except for slight deviations. But just to show you how it would look like, we can go to like -90, for example. Oh, yeah, I forgot one thing. Instead of doing negatives, you can actually just flip it to 180, and then switch the angle. So it's going to go in the opposite direction. So it's rotating this way. Probably she would be facing about here. Looks good. And this is all up to you. Up to you as the artist to determine what angle looks the best. So in my case, I think this looks pretty good. I didn't really have to change much. But once I do that, once I change the rotation and the zoom, now the character should be more in line with the camera. So now Saber looks like she's part of the picture a little bit more. So now we went through rotating, fitting the image angle. Now we just want to do like a really, really simple color balance. So we'll just go on to, there's a couple of plugins that I downloaded. You don't have to do this with the plugin. You can actually just do this with the regular curves adjustment. But all you really want to do is, so for the basic idea of this is we want to match like the lighting of the background with the lighting of the character, because it's a little bit different. With Saber, we can see that the lighting is a bit more, there's a bit more range in her lighting. So what I mean is, you can see kind of like a really, really, really faint, like reddish, almost purplish hue on her armor. But on the background, there's basically no reddish bluish hue because, of course, it's outside. And because of that, we want to make sure that we match like the coloring of the lighting of the background, the color and the lighting of the background with the color and lighting of the character. There, you can get really into it with color correction is a very, very detailed process. But in this case, we'll just do a very simple one, just to show you kind of like the basics of how to do color correction. So in my case, I want to kind of bring down this reddish purplish part. So we can probably bring it down just a tiny bit. See, so now her armor is getting a little bit bluer, right? That's a little bit too much. But we want to make sure that we match like the general lighting of Saber with the lighting of the actual background. So we probably want to bring up a little bit more green because the armor would reflect a little bit off the grass as well. Not too much, but just a little bit. a little bit too much. And you just kind of have to fiddle around with it. These actually, so if you go here, if you go to the top, you'll actually bring out the highlights, and if you go to the bottom, those are actually the shadows, right? So shadows get more greener, or the light parts, the highlights, get more greener. And then you can do multiple clicks to do like more detailed, fine-tuned adjustments. In this case, we'll do a really simple one. So I'll just go probably about midpoint and just bring out the green just a little bit, and then probably change the red, just bring it down just a bit. And so once we do that, we can see that instead of it being instead of her armor being like reddish purplish, now if you look at the background and if you look at Saber, um, her lighting, her color seems to fit more with the background, right? Because it's a little bit more greener, bluer greener with the background. So that was just a very simple introduction to color balance. Like you can get a lot more into it, and you can spend a lot more time with it. But that would be the very simple way to do it. Just do a curves adjustment, Control Shift M, and all you have to do is just match the general color of the character with the background. So once you do that, now we want to make the feet touch the floor. So what I mean by that is, with right now, it looks like Saber is almost like floating, and that's because there's the grass doesn't actually come up. So I can kind of draw on this layer. But basically, usually when you have like an actual person's feet on the ground, the grass would actually, let me draw something reddish. The grass would actually come up like this, like it would obscure parts of the feet, right? Because there's the grass actually has texture, and so when there's absolutely no grass like covering the shoes at all, it almost looks like Saber's like floating in the scene. So that's why you want to make sure that when I say you want to make the feet touch the floor, all you want to do is you want to match the texture of the surface that the character is standing on with the feet. So in this case, since it's grass, I'll do a little bit of a cheat. I just add a new layer. It can be on the top, bottom. That's all depending on your preference. But all I'll do is actually just take a bit of this grass that I think will cover parts of the shoe. So I'll just select it using the lasso tool. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I just want to select something that looks generally good. So it'll look something like this. Lasso tools are a bit hard to get used to as well. So I'll just select something like this. It doesn't have to be perfect. But once you do that, I'll just do Control C for copy, and then Control V. So once I do that, I'll actually bring it up. This layer should be above. I'll append my last statement. So if you bring this layer up, now it looks like her feet are actually touching the ground. So if I go on to here, before moving the layer, I'll do finish selection, please. Here. Okay, so at first it seems like her feet are kind of like floating above the ground because the grass isn't actually touching her feet. But now, with the grass attached, it now looks like she's actually walking on grass, right? Now, you could just leave it at that, but to add a little bit more detail, you can kind of change the that's the wrong layer. Change the opacity, so double click on the layer, and then change the opacity a little bit to make it more realistic. And you can actually I usually like to just do a little bit of like blurring, maybe like Gaussian. You can do Gaussian, you can do surface, but a little bit of blurring, and also just manual erasing parts of the grass that actually comes up a little bit too much. So I'll just do a little bit of touching like this. I'll erase parts of it that are a little bit too prominent. So once I do that, now when I change the opacity back up, now it actually looks like she's standing on grass, right? And you can spend a lot more time with it to make it more detailed. But I'll just be doing a really quick, very quick way to make it seem like she's standing on grass. So now if we zoom, okay, so now if we go back and look at the before and after, we see her shoes a little bit more. Now we see her shoes before, right? Before, and then after. Now it looks like she's actually standing on grass, right? Because the grass is actually coming up to her feet. So that's all I mean by you want to make sure the feet touch the floor. And you can do this on a new layer. You can do different blend modes too. Usually for me, when it comes to like textures, screen tends to work. Oh, not in this case. Not in this case. Multiply. You can kind of go through like all these to see what effect you'd want. But usually, yeah, I guess for this texture, the normal one looks pretty good. And you can change the opacity too. You can bring it up, you can bring it down. But I think about there looks pretty good. So now, once we have the texture of the grass on our feet, now we want to just add some shadows for extra details. If the character is in a background that doesn't have like many shadows, you don't have to add this. But it's just for like extra detail. So I'll actually make a new layer again. You can go to the new layer here, Control Shift N, or you can actually just make a new layer here on this bottom, on this panel right here. But I'll actually make a shadow layer. So I'll just call these grass and shadow. So there's an easy way to do it, and there's more complicated ways to do it. But I'll go with the simplest way to do this. Usually would just be to actually copy this whole, actually copy the character. So Control C, and then once I do that, I'll just paste her onto the canvas. But then once I do that, I'll actually rotate the shadow layer. So I'll rotate it this. Actually, before that, it might be better if I move the copy just a little bit. Okay, that should be better. And there's a couple ways to do it. You can just use a paint bucket. So you can actually do select everything but the character. Everything but the character, since we are to remove the background, so only the character will be selected. And then if you do Control I, it'll actually inverse the whole selection. And then you can just do a paint bucket and just fill, or just make the whole entire character like a shadow. We'll go with 100% tolerance. So you can just do something like that to make a shadow. But in my case, it doesn't look that realistic when you do it that way. So I actually like to do this black and white first. And then I actually want to bring out the brightness and contrast. So first do black and white, and then I'll actually bring down the brightness, and then bring down the contrast as well. We want just a tiny bit of detail, kind of like the trees on the bottom. If you look at the trees on the bottom, you can see that there's a tiny bit of detail left, right? Some light passes through the object. For Saber, she doesn't really have many places that are kind of like see-through, but I do want just a tiny bit of detail, so that it makes the shadow look a lot more realistic. So I can do that, and I can also probably make it a little bit darker. So we did black and white, and then we did brightness and contrast, and we can probably also bring down the brightness even more, so make it look a lot like a shadow. Contrast, so something like that should be good. And you can mess around, play with it to see which shadows look, which colors and which combinations look the best. So something like this should look pretty good as a shadow. And now all you want to do is change the angle so that it looks like it's part of her shadow. It will be something like, and this is all pretty fiddly. You can kind of just mess around with it and see what looks the best. Bring it down. This. I think it should be a little bit higher up. So like that. This. So something like that looks pretty good, I'd say. And then you can also change the pan too, so you can actually see how the shadow would look like. So I'll change here. A little bit more, just a little bit more. So it would look something like this. And I think that looks pretty good for a shadow. Now we'll bring the layer down, of course, so it'll be behind Saber. Something like that should be good. And then one more thing you can actually do with the shadows is that you can actually change the scaling, right, the zoom, so it looks bigger or smaller. So it's kind of hard to tell in this picture since we don't have references. But in this case, it looks like the shadows, or the sun is probably around behind, somewhere behind the camera. So it's probably somewhere, if we use like a reference like this bush, for example. Right? So if we see this bush, we see that the shadow's facing this way. So, and the shadow of this tree is probably somewhere like around here, just basically facing behind the camera. So if we kind of use like references in the photos for where the shadow should be, we can actually make it look like so, or basically make the angle of the shadow match the angle of the other shadows in the picture. And I think that looks pretty good. It's not perfect, but that should do pretty well for a shadow. So I'll just bring it down, and then now, voila! It looks pretty good, doesn't it? And now, usually you can just change the blending mode. I like to bring down the opacity just a little bit until it matches, until Saber's shadow matches the tree shadow. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you want it to be pretty close. And then screen's the opposite. Apply, darken. I think darken usually works well for shadows. You can also just do normal too. It's about the same. But in this case, I'll just use darken and I'll bring it up one more time, and then I'll also match the feet of the shadow. That's usually where you want to match the feet of the shadow with the feet of the character. So let's just bring this, and then 1 point, probably about here. That looks good. So about there. So now the feet of the shadow are matching the feet of Saber. And then so we'll just bring it down, and then boom. Now it looks like she has a shadow. Now she looks like she's part of the picture. So we can go see the before and after. I believe it's doll paste here. So before the shadow, taking a little bit. So before the shadow, and then after the shadow. Now it looks a lot more realistic. And then with the reflection, since she's basically blocking the view of the camera, we probably don't have to make a reflection in this case, right? Unlike the castle walls, right? You can see the reflections on the water. But if you wanted to make a reflection, so if you have like a character standing to the side, so you can see the reflection, you can pretty much do the same thing as the shadow. All you have to do is just copy, right? Copy the character, and then move, rotate and zoom the character so that their reflection is on the water, and then make it a little bit blurry. So you can see with like the castles, it looks a little bit blurry. So you can use something like you can use Gaussian, you can use surface or unfocus. Some of them work better than others for like different situations. And you can also add something like wave, like a waviness. But in this case, I don't think I would need a reflection for Saber. So now we're on to our final step. So we did cropping pictures, using anti-aliasing for the edge, rotating and fitting the image, like simple color balance, making the grass touch the feet, adding shadows, and then we just want to blend the layers to really make Saber look like she's part of the image. So for this one, make sure to save your image at this point so that before you do like the final processing, you have an extra copy. You have the actual layer copy just in case, because once we do the blending layers, we'll actually just we'll we'll combine all the layers into one single layer. So for this, we can actually, let's see, merge layers. Okay, so I'll save it as well. Saving. It's gonna take a little bit of time. My computer's a little bit slow right now, but it should be okay. Okay, so once we save, we just want to merge all the layers together. So merge. Oh, I forgot about Rin. Give me 1 second. I'll actually have to delete this layer and Rin as well. And we'll just merge. Oh, let's go back. Actually, instead of doing that, you can also, if the layer opacity is not working well, in my case it's not working well, you can actually just save it as you can save it in whatever type. I just like to save it as a PNG. So I'll save it as a PNG, call it this, flatten, and then, okay. So now we've saved it as a PNG, and usually Paint.net loads it automatically. So now we have the PNG version, so there's no more layers. And then the reason we don't want any layers is because we want to affect all the layers at once. We want to do this lighting effect, right? Blending all the layers with lighting effect. We want to do it to the entire image, right? So Saber and her feet and her shadow and the entire background image. We want to do it all at once. So that way it unites the image, right? So all the images. So the effect will be applied to all the images all at once. That's why we want to merge the layers together. And then you can do the lighting effect with the levels. You can do levels adjustment. You can do hue and saturation. I usually just like to do curves. And there's a couple plugins too, like color balancing, color matching, which gets into a little bit more advanced stuff. But in this case, all I want to make sure, I'll probably just do luminosity for this one. So all I want to do is this case, I just want to get like an effect that looks, it doesn't have to be realistic. This is where your creativity can come out. You can make it look however you want it to look. You can make it look as realistic as you want, or you can make it look as like movie, posterized, right, stylized as you want. So you can do something crazy like this, right, where it almost looks like I would say like a noir film. It looks very movie-like, right, very high contrast. Or you can do something that's a little bit more like subtle and realistic. So something like that looks pretty good. And I could probably also change the color. It looks a little bit reddish right now. probably change the color. So bring it down. Oh, that looks very blue. And this is all up to you. It's all artistic interpretation at this point. So I'll do something just a tiny bit like that. Like here. I think that looks good. And then you can do adjustments for curves. You can do adjustments for brightness contrast. Um, levels is also another good one. So changing the levels. This actually makes things more like, it basically crushes all the ranges of the colors into a smaller range. So it basically reduces the range of colors. And these are your highlights, these are your shadows. But this is input, output, of course, and then you can change whatever, well, basically whatever you desire, right? Whatever looks good to you. And this is where you can play around, just have fun. Make it look as cool as you want, like this, or like this. That looks pretty cool, actually. That looks very cool. Um, so you can just mess around, like, have fun with it. And I think that looks pretty good. So now we have Saber in Leeds Castle. Now you can get as detailed as you want, right? Removing backgrounds, changing the angles. You can add different characters too, right? Character like Rin here, Shiro here, maybe. You can do whatever you want, right? But that's like the basics in how to add an anime character, Saber, into a real life background, Leeds Castle. And then we'll just go through. So we'll just go through the before and after image just to see how different it looks. So it's gonna take a little bit. Okay, and then just for one final blooper, I actually made a very huge mistake. When I did the undo, and when I did the changing the layer visibility, I actually removed all of my progress. It wasn't much, since I already had the PNG, so I just did the curves and levels. So the image might look a little bit different, but that's just to show you that you really want to make sure that you save backups whenever you do like whenever you do a lot of editing, just to make sure you don't redo all your progress, so that you don't have to undo. Sorry, so that you don't undo all your progress, and that way you don't have to redo all your hard work. Right? So every time you do like each of these steps, for example, every time you do this and this, each step, it would be a good idea just to make sure that you save, just in case you do something like I did, where I deleted all of my history. That was a bad move. But I just wanted to make that final blooper at the end. But this is how the image looks before, and I'll open the. So that's how the image looks before. The layers adjustment, and then after, or sorry, before, before, and after. So that's how it looks. And now we have Saber in Leeds Castle. And then these are all the steps that you can go through. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You can add more steps for more detail. So if you want less detail, you probably don't need this step. Like make the feet touch the floor. You probably don't need this step if you don't have shadows. But everything else, so cropping pictures, anti-aliasing, rotating and fitting, doing color balance, and then blending layers, that's just to make, those are the basic steps in order to put an anime character into a background.